and howl about America and democracy. There is no America. There is no democracy. We no longer live in a world of nations and ideologies. The world is a college of corporations, inexorably determined by the immutable bylaws of business. The world is a business. And I have chosen you to preach this evangel.
For all my free market healthcare robbing, stock stealing, retirement fund fucking with niggas. Fuck you little credit card scamming, jewelry stealing, crack selling, liquor store robbing motherfuckers. Shout to the homies, Carnegie, OG, Willie Randolph Hearst, Baruch, Rockefeller, the real Rockefeller, my main bitch Leona, pour out a little Louis XIII, Scott Rothstein, Jack Abramoff, hold your head, my road shop niggas, let's get this money. I spend my day pepping America overseas, pension for the workers, nigga please, embezzlement, etiquette, private settlement, I'm better with Confederate rhetoric from my mansion in Connecticut, foreclose a big clothes out the tenement, I twist words like a speech impediment, I hope you got good credit bitch, if not better get a new job with benefits, while I play golf with niggas and get cheddar with, new money buys brand new carrots, my old money brought your great grandparents, you got grills in your mouth, I ain't mad at ya, I own every gold mine in South Africa. Thanks, baby, you made me $1 billion. Plus, I own a building for each one of my children's children.
And we are live. This is UCY Radio, the one and only UCY Radio. It's Voice of Rebellion Radio. It is 9 o'clock Eastern Time. It is, again, that time of the week. And another big change has been made to the UCY lineup this week before we get into our topic. And I know kind of a somber anniversary is coming up on Friday. Because Friday, I believe, that's the anniversary of the 9/11 attacks from the inside. As many people just say 9/11 attacks, but for us that are awake, we would know that that was an inside job with the help of the Saudi government and the Mossad, and the United States government was the main perpetuator of that event, and we'll get into the details of why that is and reasons for it, and get into a little bit about the science, and just have a general discussion. And hopefully the lines have been opened up this time. We'll get into callers in about 15 minutes worth of the show once we do our little introduction, and that will be the 14th anniversary already. So, I'm only me being a young person, it's like I can almost remember. I don't remember actually the day it happened. I was very little then, but I remember the aftermath. I remember people talking about it, not very long afterwards. I remember mostly the fear that was inflicted by our government, the news, constantly scaring people with these terror alerts. I remember going to the airport and they would still have the orange alerts and the black alerts. All these useless codes that didn't actually mean anything. We're just there to keep people in a state of fear, similar to after the Reichstag fire in Germany, what they did by putting emergency powers. That was the whole purpose, was to give more powers to the German government, just like 9/11 was to give more powers to the U.S. government. And they were acts of false flags to consolidate power, which Germany did two major false flags. That one's definitely proven it was a false flag. Reichstag historians differ. However, I think a lot, there's a lot more evidence, and I think the general consensus is about half and half. And I don't know what the other half is trying to prove by not saying with all the evidence that the Germans set fire to the Reichstag in 1933. And then, of course, there's the radio tower attack where Germans dressed as Polish troops to justify the invasion of Poland on September 1st, 1939. It wasn't a complete surprise because the Germans had to try to justify it before with a false flag. And I really think, how there was two false flags there. I think that there's a second one that's going to draw us into a world war, like how there was a second one that drew Germany into a world war. By them invading Poland led to the start of the World War II. I think that a false flag will be made to draw United States into Syria, Iran, and that'll be the start of the Third World War. But it's my own personal prediction. It's just a personal prediction. Could be wrong, could be right. Who knows? But anyways, I want to, of course, greet back Dylan Wade, who came on our show, had a pretty good start on the first show that he did. And that was that's the first of this, I would say, this new era of Voice of Rebellion Radio that started. Definitely, I think it's a more positive era of the radio, and I think we're getting a lot more effective, interesting shows that are going to be done in the next 2 months. And so for some of the people that were discouraged, especially I know in the last few weeks, I got a couple mentions about my last co-host about this struggle. He's interrupting. I know it got really bad towards the end. I know to some of the listeners it might not have been the preferred thing to listen to on the air, but I'm just saying that things have changed, and we're going to have a lot of interesting people come through the show, and a lot of interesting shows coming up, so stick around. And this show should be very interesting, because we're going to have this just be loaded with facts, because anybody that actually doesn't believe 9/11 is inside job will believe it by 11 o'clock Eastern time. If you are not awake, your life's going to change by 11 o'clock Eastern. Well, it may not. That's a little bit of exaggeration, but I like to keep people tuned in. Don't go to somewhere else. CP Libre.
Yes.
So this is your first show on the radio, right? This is the first time you've ever done radio work?
Yes, and I'm thinking it's gonna be a real difficult, because, like I told you before, I had never spoken in English for so long, like to be in a radio show, no. But I hope I can be useful for your purpose and for the purpose of the show, and to share some opinions about what is actually happening in this world. For example, what you said, it's kind of prediction, this third World War II. Well, and I hope to be useful for this show.
Well, don't worry about not showing up to higher expectations. It's just by whatever effort that somebody can put in, just the bravery it takes to come on the radio, and we'll not get into it because this is probably shouldn't be talked about too much. But CP Libre has a lot of circumstances that make him actually having to wanting to come on the radio, and what he's doing back home, he is pretty incredible. And just to put this out there, CP Libre is the first international host I've ever had on my shows. It seemed like all my hosts before were coming from those generic states before. Ohio, what was it, Missouri? I had one, Dylan Wade, New Jersey. That state has a little bit more flavor than the other ones that my co-hosts are from. And then, of course, I have my local co-host.
I don't know if it's good flavor.
It's not a good flavor necessarily. It's a bit more, I'm just saying more stuff happens in New Jersey than some of the other states.
Yeah.
But
not going to argue with you there.
But I'm just saying is that it's pretty cool to add this, this whole other flavor of radio. We're putting somebody that lives overseas. Well, I wouldn't say it's not really overseas, but out of the country in Mexico. And I think that he can really give. He's very knowledgeable on some of the topics of definitely about South America and such. And I think I strayed away from it from a little bit, maybe for maybe a couple months there. I seem to not have talked about Latin America as much, and was going to. It seemed like I did a string of shows that seemed to deal with Europe mostly, and maybe some Middle Eastern shows, but I haven't done anything about South America recently. So you can expect those coming up. And I haven't talked in depth about 9/11. I seem to bring it up somehow in every show that I do, at some point for a couple minutes. But I never have done. I don't think I've ever even done a full show about 9/11. I've put it into other shows. But, to really get in depth and put in stuff that probably not even, a lot of truthers don't even know, and stuff that you're not going to find even in 9/11 in plain sight. I know that's a lot where a lot of people draw their knowledge about this event from happening, is that they watch that movie and then, which it does bring a lot of facts, but I don't think it brings in all the true reasons, the ramifications. It just shows why it's an inside job. It's a science behind it. And I think I do definitely recommend anybody to watch it. It's on Netflix, and it's free if you have Netflix, so it's very easily accessible, and that's why I like that film. But I think that we're going to bring the more political side. We're going to bring the economics of the event. It really spanned across many different studies of, many different, economics to military to political. It really had so many ramifications, and even the societal, really the society of fear it built on the American people and on, a lot of just the Western world as well, because it's like you look at Europe nowadays, ever since 9/11, Europe has went from the fun party place, it was kind of lax. I know it wasn't perfect by any means, and it was going that way. But I'm saying the society, the atmosphere, when people talk about Europe back in the 80s and 90s, is totally different than when people talk about Europe today. Europe today is a whole, it's like it really is not much different than how the United States is. And, it's like when people, there's a reason why some people say 9/11 changed the world. It was a major stepping stone for the elite towards the, make the society of fear in the Western world to justify multiple Middle Eastern wars. It really was a dramatic event that put them closer to, a new world order. And that's the unfortunate reality of the event. But I think at the same time, if we want to draw a small positive out of this, I think that if 9/11 wouldn't happen, because when 9/11 happened, as horrible as the event was, almost immediately people started believing it was an inside job. People started looking on the internet and started people went down the rabbit hole. People really wanted to find out what was going on in this country. It brought attention to that something was definitely wrong with this country for the people that had that mindset that they could be made awake. And then, this brought the truther movement boomed with popularity, and the people that behind it, people got more active after those events. It's, I guess, bad, in a way, it's almost like it has to get worse before it gets better, I guess. Maybe when it gets worse, people realize how bad it is, and finally that one event shocked them awake, some of these people. Now, but of course, there's been a lot of horrible ramifications with all these NATO Patriot Act. There's a giant support from the people, unfortunately, that they think that this is justified or else they're going to get blown up in a plane or something. But it's not true. And in fact, when you look at terrorist attacks, you're more likely to get shot by an outraged white supremacist than you are to get killed by a Muslim. In fact, I think white supremacist terror attacks trumped Muslim terrorist attacks. In fact, Muslim terrorist attacks of any kind since 9/11 are about 1/6 of what casualties or fatalities that white supremacists have done in this country since. And Muslims are actually one of the least likely statistically to cause harm by a terrorist attack since 2001.
To add to your point, according to the Department of Homeland Security, even right-wing terrorism is 3 times more likely than Muslim terrorism.
Well, yeah, you look at, and it's funny when a Muslim does anything, a Muslim could not even kill a person, but for example, goes into a stabs a guy and the person lives, they'll still call it a terrorist attack, act like there were actually fatalities to an extent. They'll play it on the news for days. But look, for example, this year, does everybody forget that the NAACP was shot up in Colorado by white supremacists? It wasn't. It was in the scroll of CNN. That was it, practically. And at the same time, though, there was some other Muslim deal, I believe, and then that was played instead of that. And, people actually died at the NAACP shoot. I think the Muslim thing that happened the same day was like one person. I don't know. I forget. It was back in February or so. My mind's getting a little bit clouded since it seems like it all blends together. All these trying to differ between what's actually really going on media fluff stories, and then just these major events that are on RT, and you only use big medias. And, it also, another thing that should be brought up is that is the United States government, they don't really, whenever they do bring up this issue, and I wanted to bring it up because CP Libre lives in Mexico, and down in Mexico, the drug cartels killed people by the hundreds of thousands. I mean, it's horrific.
Yeah, and daily, man.
Our media, they don't even bring it up. It's because the fact is that because if people start going down that rabbit hole again, there's different things that can shock people and they start going down a path of, they look that up. They might see, Eric Holder's Operation Fast and Furious, where he gave guns to the Mexican drug cartels. And in the last few years, hundreds have been killed by Mexican drug cartels and by the corruption in the Mexican government that, allows and aids these drug cartels. It's kind of a dirty trio, the U.S. government, Peña Nieto, and the Mexican drug cartels. And ever since 2001, you notice is that this media hyper-sensationalism, again, of terrorism, to make it seem like this is a horrible problem, that this is something that trumps all other world issues at the moment. The media plays every little small event that they could market as terrorism, and they play for days on end. When there's major events going on often that will trump that. For example, what was it? That Virginia shooting. That was the other day. I know it didn't have anything to do with Muslims or anything, but it's an example of sensationalist journalism to distract from another major things. At the same time as this going on, we're talking a couple days ago. John Kerry says that a ground invasion of Syria not only will happen or might happen. He says it will happen. He said most likely not with American soldiers. That's what he says at the moment. But he was kind of alluding that if it was necessary, American soldiers would have to go into Syria into a full-scale invasion. That's pretty much what he's suggesting, which I find way more scary because the Virginia shooting. I'm not even going to make a comment on it, on whether it was a false flag or not. Because
it wasn't.
To me, it looks suspicious, but it looks. At the same time, though, even if it was, it seems like it was an unimportant event compared to, two people dying in a shooting, there, because the people happen to be slightly famous. It was a horror. Syria.
I got your point. They try to magnify something must not be magnified, and because of racial hate or this topic deal. Well, I mean, it's funny how the mainstream media have become nowadays what the role of the communists in the 80s or the 90s. Now the main enemies is the Muslim. How they have taken advantage of this media.
Yeah, but that's exactly the point, is that they have to make a boogeyman in order to justify, taking away rights of civilians. Because think about it, in Germany they had boogeymen, of course, Nazi Germany. They had, and in fact, there was one that was a common boogeyman of both the United States later. In fact, very shortly after, they became the same boogeyman, the communists. In Nazi Germany, communists were the most despised group, even above Jews. The communists were the enemy of the German people, the enemy of the German government, and and anybody. That's who they blamed the Reichstag fire on, was a communist. And the thing was that nothing matched up because the guy was, number one, have hatched such a important attack that the Reichstag fire would have been. He was 19 years old. I really don't think that and he wasn't connected to any communist government. He was just a part of a party that wasn't even in Germany, I believe. I think it was in a neighboring country. And he decided to go to Germany and actually successfully light, probably a very heavily guarded building. And I know that countries' parliaments and stuff didn't have the security they do now, but still, it couldn't have been easy. Yeah. He said he broke a window and threw a fire starter in there. Somehow it burnt down the Reichstag practically.
To all the people who are are so afraid of communism, I actually have a question. Why are you so afraid of an ideology that's never taken root in any country? True communism will never exist. Why are you afraid of it?
I think that I think it's gotten close. I don't think that the ideas of Marx have ever gotten truly implemented in any real country. I mean, there's been so much. There's been what they call degenerated revolutions have happened in multiple states. Especially like Romania. They had in Albania, of course, Russia during Stalin, Mao with China, and the same kind of oppression happened in those states that they were communist. They call themselves communist. All those countries I mentioned. What I'm saying is
they can call themselves that. They weren't. They were true Marx ideology was never fully implemented in any of the countries that you listed.
I think the closest country that actually got close to implementing Marx's ideas and really, maybe not so much, but the one that might have made it work the most and made the idea of this, socialism / communism work was Yugoslavia, but it's not even mentioned that much, and I think it's partially because of the fact that it was actually successful. And it was an alternative to America's system that was looked very well, and it was even during the time of when they were around, actually, in the 70s, the 80s, the United States, actually, in the United States media, they actually looked up, they almost couldn't find stuff that was wrong with them. There was nothing really to argue about because a country that once had everybody killing each other because they were Muslim, Christian, and many different ethnicities living in one country had somehow gotten to peace, as Tito had brought them to peace. And at the same time, it was one of the freest countries on the planet by media standards. I mean, there was Tito, if you said something ridiculous to a Tito in a press conference, he would laugh it off. He wouldn't sick his guards to arrest you and have you detained. No, you could say something just really offensive, even you just laugh it off. That was Tito's character. It was. But yeah, I don't. Going back to the boogeyman thing though, is that of course the same tactics in the mainstream media that Germany used in the United States to make fear not only in Germany it was the communists and the Jews were the two boogeymen. The communists, they just kept saying about Stalin's repression and that that's what the same kind of things they do in the United States media, bringing up the example of a really truthfully not even a communist country, because under Stalin it was just a strongman chauvinist. I don't like using that word because the feminists love to use that word, but I'm saying by that is that he's so egotistical himself that he consolidated all the power back to him. He was many things, but it was not. And the workers were treated worse probably than they were treated under the Tsar. So it was definitely not like what Marx wanted. And the media boogeyman tactic, they also now the Muslims in general, terrorists. That's the boogeyman that they use today to justify the Patriot Act. NADA is the one that should scare people the worst, because NADA is a direct, literally nullification of the Fourth Amendment. Actually, I meant the Fifth Amendment and the Sixth Amendment, actually, because they can hold you without a trial indefinitely. And the Fourth Amendment, I had that confused for something else. That's, of course, that they can search you without a warrant. That's the Patriot Act. Got those two confused. Patriot Act, because they can bug your house, completely breach your privacy. I mean, for all we know, we might have bugs in our house or whatever. I mean, I don't know exactly what they're trying to catch, because everything I pretty much believe is put on Facebook, on the radio. But I'm just saying, we could be bugged. We wouldn't know it, but it's a direct violation of our Fourth Amendment. And these violations of our rights, they happen a lot quicker in Germany. I mean, in 1933, it was like all your Bill of Rights went out the window, and all the parties were dissolved practically. But in the United States, it's going to make it a little bit more slowly. And it's actually from a quote of Hitler said. Hitler said, "Take away all their rights gradually and slowly, and eventually they'll wake up with none and wake up in a dictatorship." Something like that, along those lines. I I often paraphrase, make it a little shorter on my quotes.
You've
that's what he
pretty
said.
much had it.
Yeah.
I could look up
And-
the exact quote if people want to be sticklers for it, but you got the gist of it.
And that was actually, I mean, it's funny too that people say, "Oh, that's crazy." If in the United States are fascist, I don't see people getting sent on trains, the concentration camps yet. But look at what the politicians are saying. Look what's in the bills. It's the same stuff that's repeated from the German script is repeated into the American script. In fact, that some of these, you see these politicians sometimes saying the exact words of Nazi politicians, Nazi leaders, of what needs to be done. I mean, in fact, like the same phrases was repeated by Hitler and Hillary Clinton about that the society's needs need to come before the individual's needs. And at first it sounds kind of innocent, but when you think about it, what they mean is that the government's needs come before the individual's needs. The state's needs come before the individual's needs, and that's a major part about fascism, is that the state is worshipped practically, and the corporations are not questioned because they are practically part of the state. I mean, the whole complex is not questioned. And that's what it's starting to become. There's people out there, a lot of people out there that think that we are up to no good by having radio shows like this, that the alternative media, that all we're doing is disestablishing the trust in government that needs to be done in order for people to, for safety to be met. That's kind of the general gist I've seen of a lot of American people that really believe that the government is protecting them from the boogeyman out there. But if people realize that there's no boogeyman out there, then they would start to question the government's, supposed savior status of everybody. And another thing to point out is that put out there is that that's actually kind of similar to what the idea of European feudalism was. Is that you were practically a slave of your lord, which is now that's interchanged with your government. The lord ruled only a 20 by 20 mile area, but you could never leave that area unless you got special permission, kind of like the very strict laws that exist now. I mean, you used to be able to cross the border with an ID. Now you have to get a passport. Probably soon you won't even be allowed to cross the borders. You'll be stuck here. And once things start to get really serious, also, and that was the thing, is that a lot of those people never left that area. Number two is that they had vassals. The military of the United States is like the vassals of the feudal kingdoms. And the vassals were, the knights or whatever, to protect from bandits or robbers that were coming in from inside. And then you, the serf or the slave or the citizen, whatever you like to look at it, of that manor, they called it, was the area that the Lord ruled, felt safe because the Lord was protecting you with his vassals. So you gave him all the stuff that you were making, all your labor, all the fruits of your labor were going to the Lord, and you just felt like he was, that's what the price you get for him protecting your life. But it's the same thing in the United States, that people realize that there are no boogeymen, that the vassals or the military need to be protecting, and that the military could go home and there wouldn't be a terrorist problem in this country. And the government is not doing any service to the people. In fact, all they're doing is just keeping them in an enslavement under this fascist system.
You have to realize who is benefiting from this military occupation. It's not the people, the American people. It's the corporations. I mean, they are taking the oil. They are taking the opium production in Afghanistan, the oil from Iraq. I think this is not directly a benefit for the American people.
Well, of course not. The American people get none of the benefits, really. And because look, you have your opium production. That of course, that this is the most secretive part of the war. I think a lot of people, it's a generally accepted concept that this war has to do with oil, but the central banking opium aspects are not thrown in there. And the opium, there's this. Afghanistan is the largest producer of opium U.S. military lost soldiers come back with these personal testimonials of them having to guard poppy fields, not burning poppy fields. You'd think that's what a sensible army would be doing, is just cut out the profit for anybody and get rid of the root of the of what could become a horrible drug. And opium is bad alone, natural. However, when they refine it into heroin, or they often, people don't realize that the pills that they're taking it's just synthetic heroin that it gets refined into pills, and that's why they're so addicted. They're doing pill form heroin, and very few Americans even get that concept. But yeah, that's another reason. The pharmaceutical companies, they take that opium and they refine it down and make their pills with it. And that's the reason why our soldiers are dying to protect this opium. And right now this war has went on for this will be the 14th year in Afghanistan, because they sent troops pretty shortly after the 9/11 inside job, and they've been in Iraq 12 years, even though they technically ended the combat operations back in 2011. However, they've had paramilitaries and small amounts of soldiers in there to this day. I don't think they're ever going to really fully withdraw out of Iraq and Afghanistan. And now they're talking about the need for an invasion in Syria. It's starting to become like, there is that T-shirt actually you can get that says all the countries that the U.S. have invaded. And it's like U.S. World Domination Tour, and of course it goes to we go back Yugoslavia '99, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria. Soon will be Iran. That's coming soon on the U.S. World Domination Tour. But of course, it's not just the United States. More complex than that. It's the New World Order we're talking about. It's the Rothschilds behind the scene that want domination to make their world government. The United States is just a military wing of it, and they have their financial wing is London, and all the banks in London is probably their financial center, and they have a lot of banks in Tel Aviv too. They practically constructed Israel. That is almost like the headquarters for them. The Rothschilds were in the Balfour Declaration, and they constructed the Knesset. A little food for thought there. I just wanted to see I wanted to go back to the 9/11 inside job. And I want to ask both of you, what was the thing that woke you up? When did you guys find out about 9/11 and how? Because I'm curious. I found out by watching Jesse Ventura, and that was back 2009. I went on 911facts.org, and I literally woke up that way. I was just too many coincidences. I know when there's too many coincidences, and that was after 40. I was like, nope, that is an inside job right there. That's impossible. But I'm just curious to hear both of your stories.
I woke up in 2013 when Edward Snowden made his leaks about the NSA. I just started researching and I fell down the rabbit hole, so to speak. I don't know exactly when I started learning about 9/11, but it was somewhere in the summer of 2013.
Yeah, summer. I think actually. It was only a few months later. That's when I met you via Facebook, and then later, just shortly after, we were doing the radio show. CP Libre. When did you first start to learn about 9/11 specifically, and that was inside job?
Since the first days after the attack, if you have the capacity to acknowledge where the attack is coming from, shortly after, why didn't you have the capacity to prevent the attack? That's what I think they are guilty. They are involved. It wasn't an inside job. You cannot be talking about the Muslim terrorism shortly after an attack if you are the most complex military army in the world. You have the best intelligence service, one of the best intelligence service in the planet. Why didn't you prevent the attack?
Well, yeah. The United States. Again, it's like the same thing with the Boston bombing. They supposedly knew where this guy. They got tipped off about this Tsarnaev's, a year or two before. The FBI had been tracking him for a year, and apparently they couldn't prevent him from, setting off a pressure cooker at the Boston Marathon back in 2013. That's when I've came to the conclusion that either A was all, when you look at the pictures and everything, that really just looks like it was faked. Maybe there was an actual bomb that went off and injured some people, and then there was some added effects in there, or that B, there was, that they just let them do it because they wanted something to scare people. I mean, I don't put anything past the United States government that they would. I mean, they did 9/11, and they helped. They were a major part, the major perpetrator of the 9/11 attacks, the inside job. What's to say they wouldn't do it to kill two people off in a smaller attack to reintegrate the. I mean, even the headlines are saying that first terror attack since 9/11 on U.S. soil and stuff like that. They're really scare people. Put that boogeyman out there in effect. I wanted to. I realize it's 9:30. Past 9:30 already, and I haven't put out the phone. And I don't know if the phones are actually working, but hopefully they are. So 718-717-8296. 718-717-8296. Shows us. I don't know. Maybe down the road, me and CP Libre will do a show in Spanish at some point, or part of a show in Spanish. I don't know. I just think it would be cool. I'm just thinking, it's like I'll become like one of those people in Spanish commercials. Always find it funny when they call up the number real fast. Llama ahora single. Like I think I could be real fast, like one of those people yelling out all UCY's number. But I don't. I feel kind of bad though on one of their shows because I don't think Dylan speaks that well Spanish. I think I'll just do part of a show or something in Spanish. I would like to do that because we do have somebody. I never even shouted them out on there, but RNA News, and a lot of their fan base is in Spanish. They're based out of Venezuela, and they share. One of the people that works for them shares our shows every week. Is actually a consistent, pretty much sponsor of our show, and Global Public Alert also. While I'm talking about the people that help us out, they also help us out quite a bit. So if you're on Facebook, check them out.
That'd be awesome. No. That would be awesome to get more audience in Latin America, in South America, in Mexico. We need a lot of TV radio shows like this. We are under the influence of the media that is not telling the truth. It's not telling even the 10% of the truth. We are brainwashed by this media. Like you said, the drug cartels in Mexico is killing people daily, hundreds of people, and nobody says any fucking thing in the media. We have to share this information for other people to be aware what is happening. It surprised me that you are more aware that what is happening in Mexico than a big part of the population.
Well, of course. I mean, I'm just saying it's like wouldn't want to be too egotistical about it myself, but I'm just saying is that of course I'm going to be an exception, to it because I've done research and I've done research about Latin America. I mean, it's for a long time. I mean, they interest me because I'm from there. I'm not from Mexico, but from Colombia. My roots go back to there. So I'm going to be interested in what's going on there. In Colombia, to go through similar situations. We don't have the drug cartels really that bad of a problem anymore. We don't have Pablo Escobar running around anymore, but we have the paramilitaries, and they're just as deadly, maybe even worse than the drug cartels. And the paramilitaries, in fact, I just wanted to, it's not really the show, but 14 of those paramilitary monsters were caught at the Venezuelan border trying to go into Venezuela to wreak havoc. So, people try to make it seem like Venezuela made a drastic decision to close down the borders because these people were getting by before. Now they can focus on catching these people because they're just going right across the border and was the sponsor of the Colombian and United States government. And if you don't know what paramilitary are, I would say watch Archer and go to season 5, and Archer gives a very funny explanation of paramilitary. So I don't think it's quite as bad as I would say. But, I say that paramilitary, right-wing terrorists that do the bidding of the United States government, often in many different countries, whether they're Blackwater, whether they're the Colombian paramilitaries, and are just paid killers, pretty much. They get paid very large paychecks, and they do ballsy but in very lethal operations. I wouldn't even say ballsy because if actual any danger where they could get killed, they usually just use their evasive driving skills and get away. In fact, they're trained in that. They don't have to go to any point. They can retreat whenever they want, come back, and then do their ugly operations when the danger goes down for a sec, and then they can relocate them and take out whoever they want. I think the paramilitaries were slightly involved with that Venezuelan representative that was killed. You remember that CP Liberty or Dylan? There was that guy Robert Serra that was killed. He was stabbed to death actually in his house with his girlfriend in Venezuela, and it was barely got even any American media attention. Imagine if we wake up tomorrow and we find that Mitch McConnell got stabbed to death along with his wife in his house. I mean, that would be on the news for 2 weeks, and they'd be making such a huge deal, and they probably would be justifying some kind of knife ban or something, in our government, in our media. But
only if the attacker was Muslim.
Probably, yeah. It would go from 2 weeks. Now it's 2 months. It would be like, really that started with, I think they didn't just take out JFK when you talk about our government. I think they took out RFK as well. And I think that was the first time they pinned, they scared people, Muslims, when RFK was killed. It's a very known fact nowadays that, because it was almost 50 years ago, the guy was supposedly a Palestinian, Sirhan.
That's convenient.
Yeah, it was very convenient. And it was also right after the 6 Days War. I think was the one in the war in '67 in between Israel and Palestinian fighters in Egypt. So it was to garner anti-Muslim sentiment because it was at that time it switched. I mean, under JFK, the American sentiment and the government sentiment we were generally opposed to Israel at that time. That's part of the reason why JFK was killed. And shortly after, under LBJ, they changed it to Israel is our undying ally. Everybody must love Israel. They are our greatest ally in the world. During the USS Liberty, he said that he didn't care if every one of those people died that were attacked on the USS Liberty. And I interviewed those people, a couple of those people that were on the USS Liberty and survived. And they had a couple of those they had very bad injuries. It wasn't like they were a chef or something. They just, the boat's starting to sink. No, they were down. One of them was down the hull, and there was a torpedo hit or something, and he was knocked unconscious, I think, and he had all kinds of injuries, and LBJ wanted to defend Israel when Israel was attacking an American ship, the USS Liberty, because they thought it was supposedly Egyptian, even though there was so many markings on it that proved it was an American ship. It was obvious to anybody that you would have to be literally blind from the air. What they have? They have some guy that was blind in that helicopter that was locating the U.S. vessel, and to think that was Egyptian. I mean, there's obvious distinctions between different countries' vessels, and an American vessel to an Egyptian vessel at the time was very distinguishable. I'm talking about false flags, and I said I was going to get into a few other false flags. There's been 2 false flags by Israel that have affected American troops or Americans negatively. The Lavon Affair was the other one, along with USS Liberty. The Lavon Affair was when Eisenhower and the U.S. government at the time was starting to lean towards a stance of they were going to work at least with Nasser, who was the current. He was actually a communist, actually, but he was not aligned. He wasn't supportive of the Soviet Union. He was independent, and he was very strongly anti-Zionist. I mean, he pointed out their fallacies when they talk about that they are returning to their homeland from the biblical times by stating a very simple fact. Israel will never see peace because they left black and they came back white. point out that these people, if these were the same people, it would be, it would at least be darker than, they wouldn't be Europeans. These people that went to Israel in 1947 were Europeans, and they chased out the actual natives. A lot of the same people, the biblical Jews that had converted to Islam later during the time of Muhammad, many of those people in that region converted, and they were in Palestine. They got chased out. So the ironic thing was the actual descendants of a lot of those biblical Jews were the ones that were kicked out during al-Nakba, which means a tragedy, and that's even a tragic holiday that's celebrated every year in Palestine. And Egypt, going back to that, Egypt and the United States government had sort of worked out a little bit of a friendly relationship. Israel couldn't have any part of it. They were very angry, so they activated a terror cell that they worked with the terror cell. It was like an Islamic terrorist group, and they ordered the terror cell to bomb the Americans that were stationed in Egypt at the time, and they did successfully. And I don't know what's the fatalities that were actually in the Levant affair, but that was 1953, I think. It was around the same time of the Iran coup that happened that year, where the democratically elected prime minister of Iran was overthrown, and they put back the Shah. Probably was it probably happened shortly after the Levant affair. If I knew exactly the dates, I think they happened the same year. But the Levant affair was a false flag that changed really the relationship between, because I think that later they blamed Nasser for what happened to the U.S. troops, and then the support was withdrawn, and the U.S. wasn't going to help on the Suez Canal project, the original one. Egypt's working on the second one right now. That's why I say the original. And then there's all kinds of, and I knew I couldn't stray away from it. I have to mention in this show is that Israel, by a lot of researchers and very well written articles you can find online, had an involvement in 9/11. And if you look it up by the arrest records on those days on the day of 9/11. Something like 60 Israeli nationals were arrested around the area, including the infamous Mossad vans that were roaming around the city. There was one van where Mossad operatives were bringing bombs across the George Washington Bridge, which connects New Jersey and New York City, and they stopped them there. It looked like it was I don't like to speculate and make a conclusion that might not even been close to what was really the intention. But I'm no detective. But the first thing that rings to mind, considering all the other things that happened, is that there was a confusion that wasn't put into the false flag. That they realized that the other events were enough. That they probably. They probably realized that because this happened, I think, after everything else has happened. Probably, I bet they waved that part off. But it's true that van was full of bombs and it looked like they were going to detonate and blow up the bridge. Then there was another van, and you can look it up. In the hours of 9/11, there was a van that had a mural. It's called the mural van, that had a painting of the Twin Towers. And a plane going in, a plane like right next to it, like it looks like it's about to go into the tower. Just coincidentally on the same day. And the Israelis also, another involvement key that I can see is that there were a group of Israeli nationals filming the towers as they were called the Dancing Israelis. 5 Israeli nationals they were shooting footage of it, and they were dancing as the towers were being hit. Why would anybody would be dancing while the towers are being hit, unless I guess that maybe you just hated the United States so much, but these people are Israelis, and that doesn't exactly match up. But I guess it's nothing out of the realm. But why would they be shooting footage of it in the first place? And how would you know exactly what's going on while it's happening? It's like really at first it would be. It's very hard to even tell what was happening if you were there. mean, you just see some object. Again, you probably assume it was a plane went into the towers. And why would you be filming something of a random footage of the World Trade Center on that day and just be coincidentally have shot it on camera and it wasn't like they were shooting amateur footage; they were shooting professional footage. So
they already knew it.
They definitely knew. They definitely knew, and it was part of the plan. And there were probably some kind of administrators, some kind of people just to overwatch, make sure, probably some kind of supervisor, make sure that everything goes to plan. North Tower gets hit first, South Tower gets hit later. They pull the North Tower, or they pull the South Tower first. The North Tower gets pulled a few minutes later. And anybody ever hear that footage? Why does a firefighter, going to the whole circumstances of the building falling, why does the firefighter say, we need to pull it? Pull what? Well, are you pulling people out of it? But it happened right before the collapse. Pull it is usually a word used by demolition experts, as in they're going to pull the whatever detonation device, and that causes the explosives to go off in the building, and then usually the way it goes is they break a foundation. It goes, it looks like there's different ways to implode a building. Justin Ventura, I think that's part of the reason why he was so convincing when he was talking about his 9/11 Inside Job, when he did his 9/11 Inside Job TV episode, is because he was a demolitions expert in the Vietnam War. So he would know exactly, what goes on during demolition. He is a demolition expert, practically.
Yeah.
I mean,
there's a lot of footage on YouTube where you can see true demolitions, and they have nothing to do with what happened in 9/11.
What do you mean, like true demolitions? As you said, they have nothing to do. You mean, well, they look actually pretty similar when you look at what happened.
Yeah, of course. I just watched video of experts in aeronautics experts that say, for example, the stuff about the black box recovery, about the speed limits that supposedly were exceeded in the official reports, and that's not possible with the aircraft that there were.
But yeah,
that's an interesting point.
Yeah, there was these aeronautic experts, the pilots for 9/11 Truth is a pretty large group, and who better would know what a plane would do going into a building, or what planes do in these circumstances that were found on September 11th, and actual pilots themselves, and the maneuvers and all that. We could get into that. I mean, man, we could go for hours on this stuff, but the actual demolition, you can actually see a little poofs of smoke. As I think everybody here has actually seen that, these pictures where there's a poof of smoke, 20 feet maybe under the actual debris cloud as the building starts to collapse from the top going down to the bottom. And what would cause that is that a explosion is pulled, for example, at the 65th level of the building, and then, there's an explosion. And that means that it's already, everything from 70 up has already been imploded. And then when you pull 65, there's no foundation keeping up 65 to 70, so that collapses. And then 60 through 65, another explosion pulled, and it keeps doing that until everything's been demolished. And that the whole idea is that jet fuel could cause this, that for that lapse in structure where the building starts to collapse is impossible. Because that would have taken an 1,800-degree fire. The simplest way to prove that, you don't even have to know the science behind jet fuel, and those pilots from 9/11 Truth will probably tell you the same thing. Jet fuel does not burn that hot, but the Twin Towers did not have white smoke.
A special explosive to get that degrees in temperature.
And that we'll get into. Yeah, I'm going to say that in a sec, actually. And it's good. I actually would have forgot about that part. Thanks for reminding me. But I was going to say is that you would have seen a white fire. It would not have been yellow and orangish flames like we saw coming out of the Twin Towers. That's that's like a fire that you get out of a bonfire out back, and that's not going to 1,800 degrees. If that was 1,800 degrees, you wouldn't be able to be really near that thing without starting to burn yourself. That wasn't a roast. That wouldn't be a roasting marshmallow fire that burns steel. Hell, it barely burns aluminum can if you throw it in there. Wouldn't suggest doing that because it's gonna like toxic fumes everywhere. But that's beside the point. Thermite was what was used probably, and that's what's found in the building to melt actually melt down anything. And thermite was found there. Nevertheless, there was this pool of lava that they went from months after the actual event of the Twin Towers falling. It wasn't explained by anything, but this pool of lava, practically was thermite. And if you look also another thing at how the beams were cut, the beams were cut at a perfect 45-degree angle. That wouldn't happen. It just by the science of entropy or how randomness, that could not happen where you see perfect 45-degree angles of the steel beams being cut. So that's
it should have falling straightly, not the way they fell.
Yeah, and it falls straight down. I'm just saying is that if it would have been a lot more disastrous actually if that was real, because they wouldn't have fallen straight down most likely. It would most likely probably at some point tipped over, wouldn't collapsing probably, start to actually, fall over part of the building, and it would have fell over into the blocks nearby. It would have not went straight into its footprint like it did. I mean, that is a building that was almost 1,100 feet tall, and it fell straight into its footprint. The odds of that are just so low that it's another circumstance. Like I said, there's just so many circumstances before it becomes impossible. You can't have, just the odds of many of these things happening are just so low, and you just add them together. It's just nearly impossible. Some of the stuff is impossible, and I wanted to put I wanted to ask Dylan something here because I grew up down here in Florida, so there's a lot of New Yorkers and stuff, down here, and they do the same stuff. Unfortunately, not many people that are actually from New York I've met. I don't think I've met one from New York actually that talked about 9/11 as being an inside job. They always start going into this slightly Islamophobic, slightly just rant about the horror of the event, but then they start justifying other horrors of because they believe Muslims did it. They believe that we should be going and practically bombing everything over in the Middle East. But I want to ask, you grew up in New Jersey. I want to ask you, what was your? I've even talked to anybody about this and talked about your point of view, because I'd like to be interested. I'm interested in what's your personal experiences with talking to people there, so close to where the event happened about 9/11.
Well, my family in particular, my uncle was supposed to be in the towers the day they collapsed. So my family is very emotionally invested in it, so I haven't even tried with my family. But outside of that, really, I've gotten into it with a couple people about it, and I guess it gets worse the closer you get, but here it's very Islamophobic. It's horrible. I mean, I had people calling for the genocide of all Muslims. I've had people saying we should turn the Middle East into a glass factory. I mean, you hear it all over here. It's much worse than I would assume it's much worse than anywhere else in the country because of how close it is.
Well, again, like I said, is that I see that I can imagine, because I've had those few experiences with New Yorkers, and those people that are that are down here in Florida. They moved from New York. A lot of them were in New York in 2001, and they have such a negative view about Muslims. They start going into and the thing is that's most striking is that their idea about how to deal, even if you had that perspective, like you actually believe 9/11 was done by terrorist groups, that doesn't match up to just create many other horrors with that by they start saying, oh, we should turn Iraq and Afghanistan into big parking lots. I mean, that would be more useful land than what they're already using it for. Stuff like those kind of comments. and you hear it. You hear it with other people too. You know, the countryish types, and it's been kind of promoted through the. I'm not saying all rednecks. In fact, I know some rednecks that have my point of view on these topics. But I'm saying that, you know, the mainstream country music that's kind of promoted it, and this jingoistic mentality of you know, it's. I think that definitely up there. I couldn't imagine, you know, like, you know, trying to talk to those people about it. I mean, I talked to some people down here, you know, and some of them actually were receptive to what I had to say, because, you know, here's the thing is that if you can usually convince people if they hear you out on anything. Usually they'll just shut you up at the fact when you say 9/11's inside job. The media's programmed them to be like, oh, this is a crazy person, better get away, better stop listening to what they're saying, or else they might make me crazy or something like that. But then you start putting out the scientific facts, like what we're doing right now, and we have a reasonable discussion. You know, you can talk in a calm tone. If they listen to Alex Jones, yeah, they're probably going to think that it's a bunch of baloney, all the stuff we're saying. But there's many different factors that make people, you know, believe what they think about the 9/11 truthers, and then they won't even hear us out.
The truthers themselves they don't help with this at all. I mean, there are people who go around saying that it was lasers that destroyed it and there were no planes. Those people are more harmful than helpful. We want to have a reasonable discussion, but then people go on YouTube, and by the way, please don't do your research on YouTube. Find some other venues too, because YouTube videos can be skewered in many different ways. But I digress. They go on YouTube or Google and they see lasers used to take down towers, or people saying miniature nukes were used, and they dismiss the whole community. That's the problem. We harm ourselves by looking too much into things.
Well, yeah, I think that they almost start to. I think that there's some truthers, unfortunately, and I never really addressed it. I think that they want it almost starts to become a competition of who's edgier. It's like, oh, my thing sounds. I'm going to defend this more obscure topic because, you know, like, they don't want to, you know, fit in with the what's considered, you know, what the agreed evidence that we're putting out here. We're putting out the agreed evidence of 9/11. You know, what we're getting our stuff from is architects for truth, pilots for truth, all this, you know, engineers for 9/11 truth. You know, these respected communities of intellectuals that have, you know, that have talk about the same, you know, they believe it ended up in the same result as these other people that say about the laser beams and stuff. And it's like, I would like, again, if they could have a reasonable discussion and give me a lot of evidence and actually start citing stuff about, you know, from experts, then maybe I could talk with them. But, you know, it's, again, they never really back it up in these YouTube videos. And about the holograms, I don't buy it. I mean, the people say that really it's like, I mean, I know that they play our minds like they suck us into these scripts like it's a Hollywood movie, but it doesn't mean they're actually doing Hollywood movie stuff that would be very easily detectable that wasn't true. Because also, you know what would happen? Let me probably, this would almost be impossible for that to be pulled off and nobody realized. Because what about those people up on the whatever floor that was, the 100th floor, that got hit by that? They supposedly, you know, if they, you know, they all died immediately because something hit it. It looked like a drone, a military plane. There was no survivors up there. They tell the story. There were survivors on lower floors, but if those people up there, you know, had just been hit by a hologram, a bunch of them could have ran down, and probably would have been at least a few that would have survived the fire or whatever that was started, and then would have gotten out of the building and would have said, wait a minute, I was on the 100th floor and there was no hologram. Or, I mean, there was a hologram, there was no plane to hit us. But there was something that hit them, and it killed them immediately, unfortunately. It looked like it was, I don't think we'll ever be able to 100% confirm. However, from my own watching 9/11 in plain sight, I believe it was a military plane by the fact that it was gray, had no windows, seemed to have some kind of package that usually isn't on planes, passenger planes. It looked like a military type deal, and it's about the right size. military plane could be, from a far away view, looks like a regular plane. Anyways, I think that there was a pilot that spilled the beans. I think about that he was supposed to have flown one of those planes that took off and got either crashed in Shanksville or the Pentagon or up in the Twin Towers, and he said that that didn't they were told to not fly or something like that, and then those military planes actually probably the military planes I think hit the two towers. Let's talk about the Pentagon here since we haven't gotten to that. The one employee that walked out of the holes that the supposed plane went through at the Pentagon said there was no evidence of a plane crashing. So you would think that there would be all kinds of evidence. There would be wreckage. There would be big parts of the plane all throughout that hole. There would be luggage. There would be bodies. I mean, not everybody's going to get burnt up and a hit like that, especially going into a building. I mean, there's been more horrific crashes that were very little chance that anybody could have even lived or stayed, even not been completely burnt up. There would have been definitely bodies. Nobody was recovered from that, from what I know from the Pentagon. All there was all there was in the Pentagon was that hole, and also that hole where's the wings? Did the wings fold up at last second? I'm pretty sure that would be some high tech thing that I've never seen of planes that can fold up their wings at the last second, and it's not because passenger planes, the wings are fixed. The only things that move on the passenger planes are the little part that changes for landing, but not the entire thing. So where do the wings go into the Pentagon? There's just a hole in the camera footage. One of the most secure buildings on the planet. Maybe the Federal Reserve is probably more secure. I mean, if considering that's where the Ponzi scheme that keeps America enslaved happens, I imagine it'd be very, very hard to break into that building. The Pentagon's right up there with that and the Vatican or something. And there's no camera footage that actually proves that a plane went into the Pentagon. Just an explosion. A lot of stuff could have caused an explosion. A missile could have hit the Pentagon. A bomb could have went off inside the Pentagon. But a plane, there's no footage. And they say that, it was because of the 3-second loop. So, I mean, it seems like that seems to be many of the things about the 9/11 commission reports, that everything that they stated, it would just been so convenient if it, that they, for the cover up, that they don't have to show anything because they get to make up these excuses. They just have excuses.
One point I to mention is that these radio shows are an opportunity for us to tell the experts researching the facts about the 9/11 that we are here listening to you. We are here expecting more information about it. We know this was an inside job, but I am not an expert. You are not an expert. Many of us are not experts, but we are listening to them. We are expecting them to tell the truth, that like they have done.
Well, yeah, there's the experts, and then there's the other. We're talking about the experts that are willing to actually, have the integrity to do their job and actually put a real investigation into this. There were the experts, of course, that they used to spill lies at us in the mainstream media for years after the attacks, and they used, and then they had the official 9/11 Commission report, one of the biggest jokes that have been perpetuated on us in in American history. The 9/11 Commission report is just a book of lies, that is easily, just so many things are easily disproven. You can disprove so many little different aspects of it, like the Pentagon, or in the Pentagon. Another thing that should be pointed out about that is that, well, I already said it, but I'm just saying nothing was recovered from the Pentagon. Nothing. It was a hole in the Pentagon that was an explosion on a camera that has nothing to show what the explosion was caused by. If I
were a terrorist, I wouldn't expect this low level security in the Pentagon, one of the most secure places on the planet.
I wanted to point out one more thing about the Pentagon before we go. Another aspect of a few aspects here is that these pilots were never flown a plane they only had flown they never flown a plane in a real life situation. They only flew in training situations supposedly. Actually, it was at an air school, a flight school, right here in Florida actually, and then they learned how to fly there, and then they supposedly used their skills to do not just a regular pilot maneuvers, but expert pilot maneuvers. Most pilots would not be able to do what they did, because to have done what they did, they would have had them in flying almost right. It'd be like I can't even think of an equivalent of flying a big jumbo jet. I don't think it was a 747. It's usually what it's reserved for, but I think it was a 767, if I'm not mistaken, right off the ground for seconds at least. There had been a few seconds where they're flying at feet off the ground and then into the Pentagon. They would have most likely crashed when they were trying to get feet off the ground before they even hit the Pentagon, in a real life scenario. But apparently they were able to do expert maneuvers and crash right into the Pentagon. And another thing is that it was in the I think that there was something about the reinforced steel or something would have made that it would have crashed, and but the plane would have been the plane would have been stopped way before, because the steel that was in the Pentagon walls it's very hard for it's very hard for anything to penetrate through and to get deeper into the Pentagon. And this thing went almost to the center. I think it was just so many things off with that part of the story as well. We haven't even talked about Shanksville yet. The plane that supposedly was on its way for the White House that was turned around, and there's the patriotic story about Flight 93. The truth is that was another one where there was nothing found, not a screw, not a piece of luggage. It was just a hole in the ground in the middle of nowhere. It just looked like there was like little marks in the grass where supposedly the wings hit, but this doesn't explain the whole impact. Doesn't really explain anything there. And also, the thing vaporized. There was worse crashes. I mean, think about the one where the guy, the crazy guy earlier this year, that he had the flight that was going into the Alps. He flew the plane into the Alps, and he intentionally crashed it. This plane wasn't intentionally crashed. This plane was people trying to save it, trying to land successfully, and they didn't, and apparently that caused the plane to get vaporized. This German pilot, or the German pilot that was flying the flight in Europe into the Alps, they found plenty of stuff from that plane, and when he intentionally flew it into a mountain, and an intentional crash, you would think that there would be more damage done to the plane than a unintentional or failed emergency landing, like they were trying to do in Pennsylvania. The one that wasn't intentional for that to happen, and also that it should be mentioned as well is that is that on those flights there were cell phone calls. The only thing is that cell phones, at least at that time, did not operate at 35,000 feet above the sea level. You can make a call on a plane phone that they had, and that would actually receive. But these people were supposedly just regular cell phones, and they were calling back to their families or whatever. But I think that I think those were fake, because the cell phone technology does not match up with what was actually done that day. I really don't. I think that there was no. I don't. You talk about the no planes going into the World Trade Center. I think it's different. I think that it's there was no plane going into Shanksville or the Pentagon. I think Pentagon was missile bomb or some. It was not a plane, and Shanksville was just really just a very poorly done effort, made up story, and they literally dig the ditch and try to pass it off as a plane crash site. That's the extreme lack of effort that really went into this false flag. And I think partially sometimes the government does false flags that were intentionally bad to see how many people are paying attention, to see how awake we are. And the fact that most Americans, took the bait on that. Like 10% or something like that of Americans believe 9/11 was an inside job. The numbers have actually went down in recent years. It was a lot higher a few years ago when the 9/11 truth movement had a lot more momentum towards it. A few celebrities joined it, including Charlie Sheen even joined 9/11 truth at one point. But now it's kind of lost the momentum, and it seems like the more years go on, people seem to almost believe the original or the official story that the government puts out when more time goes on, because it just gets blurred together and they start to lose track of what's real. It's like what happened with the JFK shooting. At one point, almost all Americans thought that JFK was killed by somebody, and probably our government. Now it went down.
I was just about to mention that, man. I was just about to mention that we can compare this 9/11 with what happened to JFK. It's kind of the same stuff. The government is saying a story for years, so the people assume this as a truth.
Well, I just wanted to mention that at one point, though, a lot of Americans were very suspicious about the government on the JFK thing. And then more times went by, they actually are starting to believe that JFK story. At one point, I think maybe back then, it was partially Americans had a little bit more common sense / it's just that there was the readily available facts. Plus, there was actually a commission that said that the Oswald theory wasn't true. But then they later repudiated that commission, and they thought that, then they said that it was the single shooter theory. But I think it was just that when there's that momentum not long after an event or whatever, and people are really interested and start looking up the facts, they will come to the conclusion, to a realistic conclusion, and not believe the official story. But when more time goes by, they start to lose track of what's real. And that's what's happened with JFK and 9/11 now. And I think that's why it's important that people like us keep putting the facts out there. Keep putting the facts, because they're only going to, the infamous, I say it's almost like the infamous phrase now, because what it's been used to justify that never forget is what we're doing. We're never forgetting the victims. We're never forgetting what happened, that the government did. All people are going to remember down the road is that it happened and that the Muslims did it. And that's what they're going to, it's now, but they're going to forget all the other side facts, all the stuff that we're bringing upon, all these little details that disprove the 9/11 Commission. These details start to become forgotten, and people, the stuff that debunks the 9/11 Commission starts to become just stuff that fades out of people's memory once 10, 20 years go by. And what's the weird thing is that eventually, like they did for Gulf of Tonkin, when nobody cares anymore, and they realize that nobody cares, they get to the government realizes, wait, we can finally tell the truth about that. Like Gulf of Tonkin never happened. The attack on the ship off of the Vietnamese coast that North Vietnam supposedly attacked and led to the start of the Vietnam War. 2013, 49 years later, the government admits that what didn't happen.
Yeah, they have accepted the Gulf of Tonkin never happened. It was just an excuse to invade, like many other times in the history of the USA. But, well, that's a pretty good point to state that the government, it's just justifying the inventions to other countries. One point we have been missing in the show is that we have been citing this problematic just from one point of view, but think about the people in the Middle East who are considered as collateral damages. We are not being touching this topic.
Well, and we haven't really gotten into the international, consequences of this. Is that in Iraq and Afghanistan, almost 2 million people have died. It's horrific, the numbers that have been of people that have been killed by
all due respect,
drone pilots.
I think there has been more damage in the Middle East than there was in the 9/11.
Well, 2 million have nearly died, which is almost 1,000 times the number that were killed in the towers. And let's look at another thing is that these people it's families that are killed. Entire families are killed in these drone attacks. If you look at WikiLeaks, they have these footage of drone pilots indiscriminately calling an order, fire on them, an entire family gets gunned down. That's the most horrific footage of one I've ever seen. Even though it was no actual gore I saw, just to see these images of of these grainy, like black and white images of a family around a van. All of a sudden, they're getting bullets fired at them from a drone over 10,000 feet up in the air. The drone pilot doesn't care what he's doing. He's just acting like he's doing any other job, and you just see the family start to get gunned down. They're running for their lives, but they are unsuccessful. I think that's why they went after Bradley Manning so hard, is that he put a lot of that stuff out to WikiLeaks. These horrors that if anybody anybody that doesn't have a black heart saw. And what I mean by that is just somebody that's missing a heart. It doesn't have. You would have to be a sociopath or something to look at that footage and think that's justified. It's horrific, and that's what's happened. Or what we saw in that on that coast, that horrific image that it's going to haunt me probably, of the little Syrian boy that drowned escaping from the wars that the United States have created. He's an innocent 4-year-old kid or whatever that was trying with his family to run away and try to go to a country that wasn't engulfed by the war, and because they won't allow easy access to these immigrants to the countries that they justified war against, and these people are fleeing from those countries, then they tell them that they can't come to the countries that don't have the war, and and then they have to sneak across on little rafts and stuff across the Mediterranean. This little boy drowned. And
it's insane. That shit. What is causing these people to flee their countries? Well, the greed of countries like USA and England, and these organizations like the NATO and the EU, that are taking the events like the 9/11 just to justify the military action of these countries. But let's see what is behind all of this. Behind all of this is the greed. They are trying. By the way, the Muslim Muslims have been doing well things in the Middle East. Nobody realizes that they're being progressing as societies. Maybe the USA and the other countries I mentioned, they don't want these Muslim beliefs and these Muslim countries being progressing.
Well, no, it's kind of the true plans for Israel is not what you see. It's not even to take all of Palestine, like people think. It's a lot more dire and severe than that. Israel wants parts of Saudi Arabia, Syria, Iraq as part of their greater Israel plan. That was the original intentions, and I don't think they've ever really strayed away from it. I think they want this giant greater Israel is what it's called. They want this, much larger country with all that land, and I think that's why they want to keep the Middle East so destabilized, is that they can't accept any country in the Middle East, in that whole region, being any bit anti-Zionist, and they try to start war against all those countries like Syria, Iran, Yemen. Now that the Houthis have taken over, the Western media in Israel have been hell-bent on supporting whoever will throw the Houthis out of power, and they want all the Middle Eastern leaders to bow down to Israel. And the Saudis do that, and that's they expect everyone else to do that. The Qataris do that. Almost all the countries do that. Whenever Israel uses that justification, well, what's 6 million Jews in Israel compared to 2 billion Muslims? However, a lot of those countries, some of the most populated countries of those 2 billion Muslims are pro-Israeli. It's like the Saudis are, Turkish are, the Qataris, the Bahrainis, the Kuwaitis, the people, the United Arab Emirates, they're all pro-Israel. And so they really have most of the Middle East to their disposal, actually. And then they're Israel has. This is actually a very specific number, and I have to thank Larry from on UCY. I have to thank him. Told me 411 nuclear warheads belong to Israel. A country the size of Connecticut has 411 nuclear warheads in there. That's enough to blow up half the world.
Yeah.
No other country in the Middle East has nuclear weapons. Iran is not building their nuclear program unless there is some very, very unknown. They've went so underground with the project for weapon. It's all for energy, medical research. That's it. I almost think that at this point, and I know that some people are going to think that I'm crazy for saying this, but I think that Iran at this point has the right to make nuclear weapons if they want to, because Israel could any second press a little button and then every little city in Iran is turned to dust. They can't protect themselves. It's like that. That's why I don't blame them when supposed hostile countries are doing militarization of themselves. I don't think there should be nuclear weapons on this planet altogether, but
yeah, I'd rather
I think Iran
not exist. But if the U.S. is allowed to have them, why isn't Iran?
Yeah, and unfortunately, we're not going anywhere near. People think that because the Cold War stockpiles, it's true, have went down. Cold War, the Soviet Union, 45,000 nuclear weapons. The United States had about the same, 45,000 nuclear weapons, just enough to blow the world up 20 times over, probably. But it's not really. We're not going towards any real progress on nuclear weapons. They are just just more countries are really getting them actually. Since around 1980, Pakistan has received them from the United States. They got nuclear weapons. India got them not that long ago. North Korea, out of necessity, at that point, it started making nuclear weapons. I think that's when if you witness all the United States invasions, any country that's not trying to get invaded would probably, if they had the choice, would be building that. But not all countries get the choice, but they have the choice, and the country, and then of course a lot of the European countries have nuclear weapons. NATO is armed with with them. France, Britain. And and the thing is that compared to like 20 years ago, is that there's probably more of a chance that they'll be used than back then. Because there's just so much tension right now. If you look at what's really going on between Ukraine, between Syria, it's all stuff. And it's all stuff that they frame on Russia, on in the Ukraine instance, war in Syria on Bashar al-Assad. But it was all created by DC. It was all created by the bankers. And truth is that a third world war they would love, because it'd be probably the most profitable event that they've ever had in history. War means money to them. Debt equals money to them. Stuff that's horrific for the general people to deal with. Massive debt burdens, war. It makes a ton of money for the bankers.
Just look at the emerging economies in the world: Russia, China, India, Brazil. They have made an international bank for other countries. For other socialist countries to improve, to progress. So this has been a cost also for the U.S. and these countries to avoid these new emerging economies to exist.
Well, yeah, the BRICS is a big example, and like I said, there's these big economic events also that are going on right now. BRICS is I think that it's going to hold up to some extent at least, and it's an alternative to the World Bank and the IMF. That have been the World Bank and the IMF are, at least from on the surface, the BRICS is the opposite. The World Bank and the IMF reject sovereignty of countries. They believe in corporate globalization, internationalism in a bad way, not in the way that Trotsky talked about internationalism, as in the workers all around the world uniting against the elite, but in this way, internationalism, they believe, is in all the corporations uniting all around the world to screw the poor over and squeeze out all the money that we have, the little that we have left. That's what the IMF and the World Bank believe in, and also levying debts that keep these countries forever in debt, not to, usury practically. BRICS believes in, reasonable loans that actually are not to keep people in debt forever, not usury, and they actually have, and I don't think they would ever want people paying for what their governments put loans on, as in the United States people, not the United States people. When we send our money off to the IRS, that's where it's going. It's going to the Federal Reserve to pay off the giant debt that they charge us for printing our currency. It really should be called the Federal Reserve dollar, because it's not. It's a private corporation. The Federal Reserve. They also they print out a worthless dollar. And then that only worth is what it's traded in, and then they charge us for printing it. And the BRICS wouldn't believe in charging people for loans their government takes out. And BRICS respects national sovereignty. That's one of the main principles about it. I think BRICS seems promising at the start. Of course, I'll have to see what it turns into before I make a complete judgment on it. I think that it's I think that what we saw in Greece could have been slightly prevented. At least some of the damage could have been controlled if they would have, instead of continuing by taking the EU bailout, they extremely screwed the people over because they have to pay for it. All their social programs gone. Terrible austerity. Austerity just means rich people get to keep all their money, poor people lose everything. That the little bits of stuff that the government gave to them is gone. Greek people are going to suffer now. Spears. He sold out. But if they would have joined BRICS, like Russia gave the hand to Greece and told to Spears and the Greek government, join us and we'll save you out of this, he said no, and he took the EU bailout. He really just brought Russia on for a ride and made it seem like he was going to start some kind of alliance. And then you know what he does next? He makes an alliance with Israel, a military alliance with Israel. He proved what he was really about. And, I think now after watching now after all that, while the Greek people now he lost all the support of the Greek people, probably that's why he's resigning, so he can get away from the position and not face any real criticism because he practically just started his job. Now who knows who's going to take over Greece? I'm really worried that Golden Dawn's going to take over Greece, which is a fascist neo-Nazi group that believes every immigrant in that country is a problem, and they're the immigrants are the main problem, not the bankers. Golden Dawn is a joke. I mean, if you really blame immigrants for the problems your country faces and completely ignore the bankers, it's like on the drain of what a banker does, of what bankers do to your country compared to what immigrants just fleeing from a war do. Immigrants, by the resources they drain, is 0.01%, and the bankers 99.999%. For example, in America, there's many. They use the media uses the distractions, make it seem like that's the major problem. Like in America, people believe welfare recipients in the hood or whatever. They think that's the problem. They think these welfare queens are sucking all our money away. The average taxpayer sends like $6 a year to welfare of poor people, but sends hundreds a year to welfare corporations. 99.25% of welfare in this country goes to corporations. 0.75% goes to poor people. It's these kind of media distraction stories pinning us against each other, and not us, and not realizing it's us against them, the corporations. That is how they do the divide and conquer. Divide and conquer that's part of their MO. Anyways, CP Libre, because I haven't.
Yeah.
I kind of figure that Mexico has some of the same tactics. The United States have many different tactics to keeping us divided. they play the race card often, or they start going with the many different, religious aspects. They just do, these media bring up these same topics over and over again to keep us divided. I wonder if Mexico, I don't know what's exactly the media that they have in Mexico down there, but what do you think they do to keep the people divided there so they don't unite? Because I'm sure they use the same kind of tactics like they do in the United States.
Yeah, I know. We share topics about the things happening. I mean, globalization is talking about a globalized problem for all of the people in the world. We are suffering because of the political economics. We have suffering oppression about for the Mexican government. As I told you, they are killing people. They are actually killing people, and many innocent people. They have nothing to do with the drug cartel stuff and this shit. They're killing people because we are rising against this government. We are raising our voices, but I think we are realizing that the only way to defeat this government is to be united, to fight shoulder by shoulder, and we are doing it. We are doing it, as I told you. The people must retake the ideals of Zapata and of Villa. Because our revolution was stolen 100 years ago. We must retake these ideals in order for us to raise as a country, as a free country. And we must follow the example of countries like, I know we have discussed this thing before, but I like to take as an example Cuba. Cuba has been successful despite they have been blocked. And despite they have no natural resources that give them the opportunity to progress. I mean, if Mexico made something like they made it in Cuba in 1959, we have a lot of natural resources to be a first world country.
Well, yeah, Mexico could have one of the best economies in the world, really, if the people could. I mean, it's just the thing is that they are using all those natural resources already, but it's the corporations get all the profit. That's why we have people who have $70 billion, like the one guy in Mexico, is because there's a monopoly by the rich people on those natural resources. If all the people got the benefit in a collective, collective effort of making Mexico to a first world country, Mexico would definitely be a first world country with the people all in the middle class. And I think with Cuba, I think there was definitely some major problems though. I don't have the same position as most Americans. Some Americans think Fidel Castro was like up there with Adolf Hitler in America in the history's bad guys. But I think Castro made some mistakes in the '60s. But I think that he corrected himself, and I think he kind of redeemed himself in the '70s when he helped out the revolutionaries in Algeria. Or no, not Algeria. That was the Algerian Revolution was in '59. That was the same year as the Cuban Revolution when they liberated them. De Gaulle, actually, the current leader of France at that time, let Algeria be independent. But in Angola, Castro had some flaws, and I think that. I think the ideals though of the Cuban Revolution definitely, and some of the things that the Cuban Revolution taught us about how to be a revolutionary and how Che, what he did definitely, I think that could be drawn into the Mexican revolution of today that is starting. It's already started. It's not really a thing that looking into the future. When you look at these protests after the kidnappings of the 42 Mexican student dissenters. It's really it's the predecessor towards actually. This is the start of the revolution, and it's probably going to end up with people having to take arms again. And look back to what they need to look at some of the things that happened in Venezuela towards the Bolivian revolution. That a lot of South America has been freed of these grip on their countries that they had during Operation Condor, where during the years of Pinochet and all these other dictators that the United States government propped up and supported for decades, millions died in South America under fascist dictators that the United States supported. Pinochet, Stroessner, the Brazilian dictator, that his name is eluding me. And it was also a safe haven for Nazi criminals. Carlos Barbie
was part of the reason that it's not even talked about, that Che Guevara was killed not only by the CIA, but by with the CIA had the help of Carlos Barbie, who was he was a high up Nazi war criminal. I think he worked at Auschwitz, I think, and this guy ran to South America and lived in Bolivia, which was another fascist dictatorship at the time. They gave the peasants a little bit of concessions with the land reform, but it wasn't a true land reform. The British still had control of the land in Bolivia, and the government still had a stronghold, the fascist government in Bolivia. And they had one in Venezuela. They had one in Colombia. They had a military dictator. Unfortunately, I share a part of the name with them. I don't think I'm related to him, but Gustavo Rojas Pinilla. I do share in Latin America, we use our paternal and our maternal last name. My maternal last name is Rojas, but my family is not any. The weird thing is actually when it comes to the ones that are political and actually are really involved, there's only really one besides me, and he shares a lot of the same things that I believe in. But most of my family, unfortunately, is kind of they're kind of like how Americans have became. It's like how Colombians have became. Unfortunately, in general, just became apathetic. They just keep doing their generic, mundane lives, not looking at what's really going on. And then there's a few that they're involved, I guess, but they just they vote for the trendy politicians. What I mean by trendy politicians, is the mainstream ones that are trendy at the moment. Like Hillary Clinton is now, or Donald Trump has became. And it's cool at the moment, but it's only cool at the moment. I mean, I think if Donald Trump actually gets the power, and all the people that support him along the way, they're not going to be looked as pretty idiotic down the road, especially with all the warning signs that Donald Trump has gave that there's going to, as the picture said that I saw before, because of his hair, there's going to be hell to pee if I became the president in 2016. It was really a corny joke, but I'm just saying Donald Trump is going to it's not going to be a good ride. I mean, I know the elite set the agenda, but Trump doesn't seem to be very defensive on that. He seems to will go smoothly with them. I mean, the only thing that he seems to differ any bit on is Ukraine, and that might have been just convenient. He said one thing about Ukraine, but he said other things. He gives mixed signals about how he'll deal with Putin. He makes it sometimes like he's going to be like one time he said he was going to be like a friend of Putin. Which was just that one time he said he was going to be a friend of Putin. The other time he makes it seem like he'll be able to deal with Putin as he's going to be able to force him to do anything. Like he said he's going to force him to fork Snowden over. I would really like to see Trump get in any kind of physical confrontation with Putin. Because Trump will act like a big tough guy until Putin's got him in a headlock and do some judo moves on him and Trump's on the floor bleeding or something. I mean, I think that Putin's got to... He keeps a restraint on him. I mean, he's very, but I think that if Trump, Trump with his ego being on 100%, if Trump would probably think that he could actually whoop Putin or something like that, and he'd be so sadly mistaken. I mean, I could just imagine that scene. Hey, Putin, you want to go up, but take off my suit. Right after that, when I beat you in this fight, I'm going to take you to the Trump ice cream parlor that I built in Moscow. I haven't built yet, but I'm going to have my guys build tomorrow. I think I give Trump too much of an Italian accent on him a little bit. But he almost acts like that. I mean, again, it's like, I'm not being stereotypical. What I'm just saying is that when you think about the stereotypical Brooklyn tough guy, that's what he tries to act like, but he's not. He's a super rich guy that has everything done for him, and again, he thinks that he can force Putin to do anything, force him to fork Snowden over. He's sadly mistaken, and I hope that Snowden eventually actually does leave Russia and goes to Latin America where he has asylum. You have to remember Nicaragua, Venezuela, and Ecuador have all given him asylum. Ecuador also has given asylum to Julian Assange, and I think that Julian Assange he needs to get to Ecuador soon. He's also been, in this exposing the American police state. He's been very beneficial to the truthers and getting a lot of their information. Assange has been in that embassy for 3 years now. It's been over 3 years. And his health conditions starting to deteriorate actually, because if you don't go outside much and you're stuck in a little small space, you'll still start to get sick. Especially someone that's not in their, prime of their life. I mean, he is in his 40s. It's not like he's someone our age or something. That probably wouldn't be shaken up by that. But he doesn't get to go outside, and that will start to affect a person. And it's been. He said like a year ago that he was experiencing health problems. So I really hope that he can get out of there and doesn't. Ultimately, we lose Assange. Without him giving us more information to the world about the American police state. I mean, he's probably going to have more information. Snowden keeps leaking stuff to this day from Russia. These whistleblowers, with Nazi Germany, they had they didn't, they had ways of they were more potent on stopping people from powerful people, people that actually have a big platform from exposing truth. The way they were more potent is that these people would get killed. But it's almost to that point in America, because if Snowden would have for example, he doesn't get stuck in Hong Kong. He gets trying to leave this country. He gets stuck in Washington D.C. and they, in Hong, he didn't even get stuck in Hong Kong. You got to go to Moscow. But if he would have been stuck in Washington D.C., for example, from after leaking that information, and was trying to head to Moscow, and he gets stuck at the airport, they would have definitely have arrested him and probably gave him, sentenced him with life in prison or death. But they were going to give Bradley Manning life in prison at one point. And I think that the whole thing with Bradley Manning, I think that they put some stuff to distract us about what he, there's some stuff, of course, that distracts even people in the activist community because of his his personal decisions, that he's made, or some people even theorize made forced personal decisions. It's very, there's a lot of mystery that bring that Bradley Manning thing. And what they might be telling us about, the thing is that what is told about Bradley Manning, what his imprisonment is like, is coming from the government. They don't let Bradley Manning talk to the press. The only people that get to talk to the press are the people that are imprisoning Bradley Manning, because they can say whatever, they can say he's doing whatever in there. But it's
all of what you said a little while ago. That they're taking all of the civil rights away from the people. It looks like the Nazi regime.
Well, yeah, and that's what these whistleblowers have been, they've been telling us, and that's why they give such harsh penalty to these people. And it's ironic because again, it's like these people that believe this, that this Democrat or Republican from the establishment, or anybody that's running this presidential race is going to save the United States, don't realize the elite hands at play. Because Barack Obama said he was going to protect whistleblowers, and what has he done? He's persecuted Glenn Greenwald, even though he was eventually allowed to come home. It was after a lot of trouble. He also wanted, he was pretty much saying that. They were pretty much saying that he was going to send Assange to Gitmo if he had the chance to. And then, Snowden, he treats him like he's an international terrorist or something. Like this guy, I mean, I think there was more bad words by the United States government about him than al-Baghdadi or something like that. Snowden, and then Bradley Manning. I mean, that during the Obama administration, Bradley Manning was originally going to receive 125 years in prison. That was actually reduced significantly, even though 35 years is not much better, considering that this guy, is going to be spending it in prison, 35 years in prison, even though it's 35 years. Considering a person that spends time in prison is very likely to have their life shortened, and so that's over half his life probably for Bradley Manning. Now, I think there's a slight chance considering, that what went on and everything, and how they treated him, that they'll probably find a way maybe to kill him in prison so he doesn't even make it out. Anyways, by that time, we're talking about 35 years from now. Who knows what's going to have went on? I think that it'll be. I don't even think that. I'm very optimistic on this part. I don't think our government, as it stands right now, this fascist government, will be standing in 35 years. I don't think it'll be standing in 25 years. I think that in our lifetimes, we're definitely going to get to see revolution happen in the United States, and I think that but will be only after a lot of turmoil, and there's going to be a lot more horrors and probably a world war in there.
Oh, yeah, you are not far as a society. You're not far away from a revolution.
I think it'll be somewhat of a, I think that Mexico is going to go very soon. I think that they're going to have a revolution next few years. I don't think Peña Nieto is even going to make it to the election because I saw that they had to bring in extra security or something when he returned back to Mexico from a trip overseas because the people do not like him that much. I mean, and it's only been halfway through his term. The elections are 2018, and it's only 2015 right now. And and even though the kidnappings were a year ago, I think that the momentum will build in the next year or two. There'll definitely be a revolution there. And I think again, the next 20, 25 years, we're probably going to see, for the better or hopefully not the worse, there's going to be practically a whole new society come about, or what would be an adaptation on the current society. And what I mean by that is that if the elites are successful, it's going to get a lot worse variation of what it already is here, and it'll be everywhere. Probably by that time, but I don't think they're going to be successful. I don't think they're going to get to spread this everywhere, and there will be revolutions around the world in the next 10 to 15 years, and I think the United States will eventually happen. U.S. will happen maybe with foreign help. But I think that'll be. I think that it actually really only could happen with some foreign help, but I think it's got to happen one day because no matter how bad it looks. I mean, if you ask the people in Nazi Germany in 1938, if you didn't ask, do you think that Hitler will ever be overthrown? Do you think that he will ever be, out of power? They'd probably be, say no. They probably think that he would be there forever, and the Nazi government would be there for the long run, but they were only there till 1945. Things change drastically sometimes in politics, and then the whole world events, Russian Revolution, same thing. And even though it took a longer time, but in 1895, when the Tsar Nicholas II of the Romanovs had just been coronated and became the new Tsar, didn't look like there was too much instability in the Russian government, and that there would be no revolution anywhere near that time. 22 years later, after several big events, including a war with the Japanese that they lost, the first time an Asian power ever beat a European power, ever, in 1905, a failed revolution, they had a successful revolution in 1917. So it was only 22 years all that happened. So that's why I'm very optimistic that things could, change for the better in the United States. And
not all of the revolutions are successful in the first time, but the point is that we must try. We must keep trying. Doesn't matter if it costs my life or my partner's life. It doesn't matter. We're looking for a better state, providing a state that's not what the state is doing nowadays. We must remove these people in power who have been damaging the country for more than a century. And this is what happens in every country of the world who has a revolutionary story, man. It's always the same story. The rich people in power abusing the poor people, and the poor people rising against. The history of humankind is a sequence of the same events.
I almost couldn't agree with that any much more. I mean, that's really, it happens so many times in history, and like I said, is that I swear it's like, if they had a playbook of all the stuff that the rich people use, the same tactics, the same stories, the same scripts, the fool the poor people, the same ways to make profit. Look what they with the Germans. And they brought all those analysts and brought all those scientists here, and they ended up doing most of the stuff the Nazis did during their rise to power and during the wars. And it's, they literally, it's like they had a playbook and they literally did all the same things over again. And, just different things from that. The story is that they used, like this election that's happening right now. Look back to 1992. All the same things were going on. Forerunner for Democrats, Bill Clinton, however. You had, for the Republicans, a Bush, Jeb Bush, or back then it was Herbert Walker Bush. This is Jeb Bush. And, yeah, I know the forerunner right now by the polls is Trump, but it does not look very likely that Trump's actually going to be nominated for Republicans. Is there going to be Jeb Bush would be the next highest poller. Trump is the wacky rich guy.
Is it bad that I would rather have him than Trump?
No, I think that's the part that's what he's there for, though. Is that everybody at the end will take a nice sigh of relief and be like, oh, at least Trump's not our president when whoever gets elected in 2016. That's all he's there for. It's to make people. It's a concession almost. It's like, well, you didn't get Trump at least, even though you got Hillary Clinton. People actually feel relieved about that.
Chris, I think we're going to be surprised, and I think we might get a Sanders.
Sanders, I've pointed out, again, boys, his flaws, and it's so we only got 2 minutes. I mean, we didn't even get any callers, and it seemed like this show.
I don't think we had the phones.
Yeah, that's what I came to that conclusion about 10:30. It was like, no, probably no phones. We'll get it worked on next time, hopefully, and we'll have callers. And I think it almost feels like when you have again. That's what I say is that having three people on a radio show, it's just not one guy talking between your two people talking between each other the entire show. It feels more like a discussion between a bunch of people during with CP Libre, Dylan Wade, and me. We only have about 2 minutes left of the show. I said this is. I think that the surprise, if there's a surprise that's going to happen in 2016, the elites might lean towards Rubio as the Republican, and might put in some combination of Rubio and maybe some other lesser-known Republican that's in the race right now that's polling low as his vice president, like Walker or something like that, Scott Walker.
I thought you were going to say Bobby Jindal.
I don't think they would go with a complete. Again, we talk about these getting the people to support. The whatever tickets. They wouldn't put a completely minority ticket. They would have one minority as the forerunner, and then the regular white guy as the vice president, and probably be the same with the Bush ticket. That Bush is going to pick some minority as his to put some flavor in his ticket or whatever he can support. But we talked about many topics this show, and about the main one is 9/11, the inside job. We're nearing the 14th anniversary. Never forget that was a U.S. government Mossad Saudi job, and that your government is mainly responsible for 3,000 deaths in the Twin Towers and the 2 million that were justified by the Twin Towers falling. We are nearing the end of the show as we are in the last seconds actually, and
running no return and nobody can stop it. Malcolm Little when he knelt before Elijah Muhammad, the comet that killed the dinosaurs, changing the earth. They love to criticize, they always say I changed for the worse. Like prescription pills when you misusing them, nigga. The Templar Knights when they took Jerusalem, nigga, and figured out what was buried under Solomon's temple, Al-Aqsa. The name is not coincidental. I know too much, the government is trying to murder me. No coming back like cutting your wrists open vertically. How could the serpent be purposely put in charge of the country? Genetic engineered sickness spread amongst me. My people are so hungry that they attack without reason, like a fucking dog ripping off the hand that feeds him. Immortal technique is treason to the Patriot Act. So come and get me, motherfucker, cause I'm not coming back. This is the point from which I can never return, and if I back down now, then